Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Alaska SeaLife Center. As always, I'm Alex, and today we're joined again with Taylor, and we are out on the floor. It's kind of noisy. Hopefully our mics don't pick it up too much, but of course we are open here at the SeaLife Center. But that's not the point of the virtual visits. The virtual visits are to bring you, no matter where you are, to the SeaLife Center virtually. And as always, we want to thank our sponsors for these, which is Royal Caribbean Group. They have made it possible for us to bring you these programs live on Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Alaska time. But yeah, we are open and we are out on the floor. We're at an area that we've been before, which is by the Touch Tank, or the Rocky Coast Discovery Pools is their official title. But you can see them kind of back there. And we're going to be taking a look, not at all of the animals. We've done that. But we're going to take a closer look at just one of the types of animals we've got there, a group of animals, primarily sea stars. But we're also going to look at their cousins, the sea cucumbers and the sea urchins. And that's a group of animals called Echinoderms. But before we get started on that, always want to take a look at the sunrise. And this morning's sunrise, it's a pretty one, but it's a weird one. So again, this is running from about 8:30 to 10:30 in the morning, but the sun's already up. What time did the sun come up today?
Yeah, the sun came up this morning at about 7:03, but of course it doesn't get over our mountains until maybe about like 7:45, 8-ish.
Yeah, it's getting there.
But the sunset tonight is at 8:54 p.m.
You can
so
see
we're
these
way
rain clouds.
over. Oh yeah, look at those.
But of course, it was sort of an April Fool's for us. I'll play it back one more time. But you can see the rain clouds here were not rain. We have just, it's a week after April Fool's, right? We're into April now, and we are still getting snowstorms. So I'll play this one more time. You can kind of see them coming in. But what time, I missed what time it was setting today.
At 8:54.
8:54.
So we're right over 12 hours.
Wow.
Crazy.
It's getting longer. And
it is.
We're on the way. We're on the way to our longest time, which is something like 18 hours of daylight.
It's crazy. Yesterday it was sunny, and then it snowed, and then it was sunny again, and then it snowed again, and then it was like a whiteout blizzard yesterday.
Yeah, just like this, just where you saw that big wave of clouds coming down Resurrection Bay, or coming up Resurrection Bay. This view is looking south.
Did you see the boat as it crossed?
The little boat cruising by. I love seeing them. So those sunrises have been really fun. If you remember way back, maybe someday we'll do a little comparison here. Like our first sunrise for the virtual visits, I mean, it was dark, and then the sun kind of like boop, popped up right towards the end. So it's getting there. It's getting there. We're going to have a lot of light for the summer, but hopefully it stops snowing at some point.
I'd like it to stop snowing. It's beautiful and all, but I would really like it to stop.
So back behind us, I'm not sure if you can see it. Back there's a camera. Whoop, there it is. I'm going to point at it successfully. There it is. There's a camera over there. That's our little handheld cam, and we have put you in that before. And right now we've got it set up over there looking down at our sea stars for today's program. But we're going to be cutting between that and some really nice B-roll. Which do you want me to show them how we shot the B-roll? Just so they have expectations?
Yes. So yesterday I walk out to the touch pools, and this is what I see. Alex has a piece of acrylic with his phone just floating on top of the water with that light right there.
Yeah. And you're going to see, it let us get some really nice shots, really good color.
That's great.
Really close. But if you've ever been down to the beach, you might have seen, kids walking around. Maybe you're a kid who has one of these. They're awesome. It's like a tube. It's just a long tube with a pane of glass at the end of it. And you could stick that down in the water, past the surface, and then you look down that tube. You get a crystal clear look instead of having to deal with the reflection on top of the water and the ripples, because as you can see, it gets a little wobbly. It's a little more difficult to see. But what are we looking at right now here?
Yeah, so this is a sunflower sea star. So it is one of the largest sea stars in the world. Also very, very soft. But these guys can grow up to like 3 feet in diameter. Yeah,
they can get up to 3 feet or about a meter. Here they don't, I've never seen one here at the center get quite that large, but we do get some that, I mean, they're like about this big across. Once they get too big for the touch tank, we will actually move them out into one of like the largest tanks that we've got, which is the aviary. So that's that seabird habitat we've talked about, 2 stories tall, lots and lots of space for them to cruise around in there, and nothing they can really eat. So these are animals, they're opportunistic in their food. They mostly eat dead things. We call them scavengers, but the truth is they're opportunistic. If they can catch something, they will eat it, and that means they have to move. And I know when we look at the camera, it doesn't really look like they move, but we have some sped up footage here that we're going to take a look at of them just moving around, because believe it or not, they do. This is sped up quite a lot. They really do book around. And the ones you're seeing there are all small sunflower stars, and these are separated out. We don't have any other little sea stars in here with them, with these ones. They will eat other sea stars, and so we have to keep an eye on the ones that are in the big sea star tank, but for the most part, we just make sure they're not getting too big and make sure they're getting fed enough.
But also, if you're looking in here, you may be wondering what the long and skinny guys that are moving around. Now, those are sea cucumbers.
Yeah, we could show them.
Here's a really awesome footage. And this is real time. So we also have a sped up one of the sea cucumber's mouth. You can see the little white pieces as he's moving along. Now, he has tube feet, which are those little projections on the bottom side. Those tube feet are basically like little suction cups. Now, that's what relates sea cucumbers, sea urchins, which we're going to talk about later on, and sea stars to each other.
Well, and we can show the urchins now. We'll get all three of the ones we're talking about out of the way, and then we'll kind of come back through them and talk about their bodies, what makes them weird. But one thing you might notice, although I guess we didn't show them a good sea star for this, something that brings all of these animals together, all of these echinoderms, the sea stars, the sea cucumbers, and our sea urchins, is that they are kind of spiny, or at the very least, they look spiny. We'll talk about that a bit. But that's actually what echinoderm means. It means spiny skin. So when we're talking about these animals, they kind of have some strange things about them. They are invertebrates, first of all, so they don't have backbones, but they're just very odd creatures. And a lot of times people come to the touch tank, they see them, they're like, is it even alive? We get asked that a lot.
I do love that question.
So that's why in these programs we always try to show you the sped up footage. And so I want to show the sea stars one more time. We're going to show them kind of sped up because they actually move around on the structure you mentioned earlier, those tube feet.
Yes, so they have like thousands of tube feet. Those sunflower sea stars, which was the one that the 4K camera was pointed on, they have up to like 10,000 tube feet.
Yeah.
So they're little suction-like receptors, basically. They also, which we're going to talk about later on, is sea urchins kind of use those as their eyes. But those tube feet help them move around, help them move on top of their food. Also, as they crawl over little pieces of grass right here. This is in our salmon habitat. So you may see a couple salmon scooting around in there as well. They're very, very fast. So sunflower sea stars are also one of the fastest sea stars. They can move about 5 to 10 feet in a minute, which is that's pretty quick.
It's speedy for them. It's speedy enough you can actually see it with your eyes.
Yes.
It's not this speedy. This is, again, sped up. But with them moving faster than other sea stars, it actually kind of makes sense if you think about it, because I mentioned they will eat other sea stars. So in order to eat them, you at least got to catch them.
Right.
So you may not be super fast, but you could be the fastest of the sea stars. And with those tube feet, actually will take us back to our little green urchin here, because they do have those tube feet. They don't just have spines, but those little waving, dangling bits, those are their tube feet. And they'll use them the same way. They'll cruise around on them. As was mentioned, they can perceive light with them, although they don't really see very well. It's mostly just like, there's a shadow, it's dark, or it's light. They see even worse than, say, the sea stars, because the sea stars do have something approaching eyes.
Do they now, Alex?
We can show that. We can show that. So our sea stars have something called eye spots, or some of our sea stars have really visible eye spots that we like to point out. So this is just the tips of the arms, and I think the last arm on here is the best one for this. But if you look down at the very tip, it's kind of curved up towards the top, towards you. If you were leaning over the touch thing, you can see on this one, there's like a little reddish dot in the middle of that arm, or just the tip. And so that is an eye spot. It can see, it's not seeing very well. Again, it's mostly just detecting like, oh, there's a shadow.
So you're not saying that they can see like we can see.
They're not making out clear images. There is a paper out there that says that these see with a resolution of about 200 pixels, which, I mean, if you think of like even just this video, right, this stream, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pixels. The pixels are the little tiny colored dots that make up a picture. 200 is not a lot, but there was a study where they wanted to see how they were using those eye spots. Like, why do they have them? They must use them for something. And this was with a species down on coral reefs, so maybe applicable to ours, but not in the same way necessarily. but they put little like thimbles on the tips of their arms, basically sea star blindfolds. And they put them down and they watched how they behaved differently versus ones that didn't have the thimbles on. And it seemed like they would more frequently sort of lose their way and wander away from the safety of the reef. So it's possible they make out enough detail that they can be like, oh, there's a lump over that way, but over that way it's just nothing, it's flat. And that way they can stay close to the reef. So
interesting.
They do use them a little bit, we're not sure entirely. With ours, when they point them up, it always makes me wonder if they're watching for like, oh, a shadow, I'm gonna hold down really
Someone's
tight.
2 fingers coming in.
Exactly. So we talked about the tube feet, but there's actually some other stuff on the underside. First of all, I want to take a look at the stomach of the sea star. And so the stomach for our sea star is kind of, I don't know, it's a little gross, I guess. People think it's gross.
I don't particularly like it.
Imagine going to like the cafeteria, you grab your tray, you get your food on there, you sit down, and instead of a knife and fork, you just kind of look at it, and then you like, blah, you throw up your stomach onto the food. And you just sit there. Like the cafeteria is just full of people sitting there with their stomach up out of their mouth on top of the food. And then when everyone's done with their meal, they just like suck their stomach back up inside.
So they actually have 2 stomachs.
So 2 stomachs just hanging out. It'd be gross, right? So here is a sea star stomach, just a little bit.
Yes.
You can see all those tube feet, but then right in the middle there, we do have the stomach out. So these animals can push their stomach out, and in fact, that's kind of the primary method by which they will eat, is they can push their stomach, and they can squeeze it. This is a picture from our old touch tanks. We actually had a divider between where the sea stars were and a couple other animals, and every once in a while, a sea star would maybe taste in the water like, oh, there's food on the other side of this wall, and they would squeeze their stomach through that gap. So this is really helpful if they're eating something like a clam or a mussel, because with those tube feet, they can pry it open, but it's tough. It's hard work to pry open a living clam or a mussel. They only have to pry it open a little bit, though, and then they'll shove their stomach down inside it like we just saw.
Wow. My goodness.
So we're going to go back. I know you love the shot of the sea cucumber because we're going to talk about their mouth. It's a little different. Each of these animals has sort of a different way of eating. We're going to get to the urchin, too. So with this slow-mo, what did you mention was coming down there?
That is part of their mouth.
I love it.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's like a little hand. Now,
we have another one of it up on the glass.
Oh, yeah. So if you're lucky and you show up at the SeaLife Center at the right time, sometimes they're hanging out up on the glass. So that's their mouth. They actually do pull food up off of the bottom. There's also an octopus in the background of this shot, which is great. But if we speed it up, you can see it's like little tiny hands that they like whip down onto the rocks. And then they kind of pick back up, and if there's anything there, they mostly eat detritus. So little scraps of dead things or waste from other animals, but I love these sped up shots of them. Now, if you were a sea cucumber that instead you kind of stuck your head up in the water column, and you just stuck those hands out side by side, like out in front of you, you might catch stuff that's drifting by. And there are actually sea cucumbers, even here at the center, that do just that. They're filter feeder sea cucumbers. And I love this because you can almost hear it like as it cleans off the tentacle, right? It's got this little, these appendages, they go out, they grab stuff, and again, this is the real speed. It's pretty slow.
Yeah.
It's much more humorous, I feel, when
it's in seven
times speed.
My goodness.
Oh, we've got a question here in the chat. Oh, no.
Ooh, how fast can sea stars move?
How fast can sea stars move? I'm going to pull back up our cruising sea star footage. They don't move this fast.
I wish they did.
As we mentioned, these sunflower sea stars are our fastest sea stars. Mm-hmm. Like a couple inches in a minute if they're really booking it, like maybe 2. Maybe.
Other species. These guys can move like 5 to 10 feet in a minute.
Oh, they're really booking
Which
it.
that's really
Actually, yeah,
quick.
now that I think about it, the time we see them move the fastest is when there is food dropped in the tank, and our tank is probably about 8 feet long.
Yeah.
I'm looking back at it, and when they drop food on the other side, they do. They're totally
quick.
cruise. So they are way faster than your average, which again is a couple inches maybe.
So speaking of food, we did talk about their stomach coming out of their mouth, but what do they eat here at the center?
Well, here at the center, we'll feed them, basically the standards. If you've seen the other things, the other animals that we feed, we've done some feed videos. But chopped squid, chopped fish, and krill tends to be what we feed them. We want to keep them well fed, especially those sunflower sea stars, because they will eat other sea stars if they're like in dire need of food. They're like, oh, I'm just going to eat my neighbor. So we don't want that to happen. We try to avoid that. So, we got another question, and I do want to recommend if you have any questions through this, feel free to type them in the chat. Leave a comment if you're not watching live. We'll try to get to those questions as well. Or you can text us in that number we have up when we're live. So what's our question?
Yeah, do echinoderms have any gender?
Whoa,
Good
okay,
question.
That's a great question. So we can actually get to spawning, which some of you may have seen one of these clips real recently on our social media. So there are male and female echinoderms, and so they will release either sperm or eggs into the water. They are broadcast spawners. So it's tied to several factors. Basically, as seasonal changes occur in the water, they go, oh, the time is right. And that lets the species kind of synchronize. Because, if you're a broadcast spawner, here's a sea star releasing eggs. This is a Dawson's sun star that we had here. You can see it, much larger eggs it's releasing out. If only one sea star does this, it's like, well, maybe it'll mingle with the opposite sex there. But they synchronize based off of temperature, based off of light cycles, I've heard, but also salinity is another way that it can affect that. So those tend to change through the seasons, and the sea stars can kind of sync up that way.
So we have another question here. How many sea stars do we have here?
Oh, total number of sea
gosh.
stars, I don't know.
I have no idea.
Just in this tank alone, how many species do we have?
There's 6 different species in the far tank.
I
we
can
have
pull that
other,
back up.
yes, there it is. Yeah, so in this shot right here, we have 2 different species. So the sunflower is the large one in the middle, but then the one to the left of it and like lower left, those are both mottled sea stars, but also called true stars.
Now we're going to get into some of our fancy footage of me shooting through the acrylic because we have 2 other sea stars. Actually, we have 3 other sea stars. I just realized one we don't have footage of. But we have 2 others in the touch tanks. In a different tank, we have these tiny little skinny ones. I mean, these are like, the arms are at their thickest, just a little thicker than like a pencil, like a number 2 pencil. And so this is called a blood star. It's orange, not really red, but it's stark enough. And then this will give us a good little segue as well. We have another sea star here called a Vermilion Star. Now we can see a couple structures on the top of the body that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
You can see this kind of weird yellow spot up towards the top, and then down at the lower right arm there, you can see they look like little worms, which these are not, although we might talk about some worms later.
That little thing that's a hermit crab.
Yeah, there's a hermit crab antenna over on the far
coming
left.
on.
But down on the right, there's some little wormy looking things. And those are actually the gills, which are called papullae, or papulae. A single one is a papula. And so those are the gills that they stick out. They're called skin gills, which is kind of a creepy name, but easier to pronounce. But they can pull those back in. So here's a close-up at a leather star, which has these all over. They look hairy, the leather stars do, and that's all those gills. And then we had Taylor just kind of reach on in and touch it. Only one finger. It's very nice touch tank manners here. But it's like, uh-oh, there's something there. It could get me. I'm going to pull those very delicate gills back inside because the gills are like the softest thing that's going to come out. Their body's pretty rough, and as the name implies, at a leather star, leathery. But it's tough because it's so slow. I actually do a little split screen here for us to kind of see the before and after. So on the left, we have how it looked at the start of the clip. And on the right, we have how it looks now that Taylor has touched it. And you can see, I mean, they really pull them in. And they can pull them in even more than this. And once the threat is gone, once Taylor's finger is gone, they'll sort of push those gills back out into the water because, of course, they need them.
So what else is on the top of sea stars?
Well, so we don't see it here, although they're probably there. They just might be very small. But there's another structure, another strange word, pedicillary. Oh my gosh, I've been pronouncing it correctly all morning. Pedicillary, which are these little structures. You're going to see them. So there's these white spots in there. Now, sea stars have spines. Frequently, many species will have spines. But around those spines, there's these tiny little claws. So what happened here is you've touched the sea star. This is a sunflower star. It is now concerned that something has landed on top of it. So it's going to check it out. It's going to reach back, and you see those tube feet come back.
That's a really good shot of their tube feet.
Yeah. So it's reaching, is like, is there something on my back? But some of those white spots, and I'm going to zoom in on them, you can see that they're opening like a little pincer. They're not just a single little point there anymore. They are like they look like a wrench, like the end of a wrench almost. And so those pedicellariae, they are able to grab, and they can move them around. And there's really tiny, tiny, tiny ones, but there's also kind of these larger ones that the sunflower star has here, and they serve different purposes. So we have a sea star here called a Velcro Star, and it can grab with those pedicellariae, and it can actually grab fish. Like they're also known as a fish-eating star, a fish-catching star, and they can grab them and eat them. But the other thing that they'll do with these little claws, they move very slow, is if something lands on top of the sea star, it'll reach back. It's like, oh, is there something on me? If it's food, great. But sea stars move so slow, they're kind of, you would think, in danger of being colonized by something like barnacles or mussels or sponges that settle out of the water column and glue themselves to surfaces. Sea star does not want to be covered in all of that. No. So they will reach back with their tube feet, or they'll use those little, the little claws, the little pedicellariae, and they'll like pull the stuff off of them and kind of huck it off to the side if it's not food. Did we have another question?
Oh, we have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So how do the sea stars puke their stomach out?
Oh my gosh. Well, that could bring us, I suppose, to another body part here. But let's take a look at the stomach really quick. So something that's interesting with sea stars, here's that original stomach shot, is that they have an open water vascular system. Mm-hmm. This means that their body fluids are seawater. They pull that seawater in from the water around them. And so in order to push that stomach out, you can kind of see here, it almost balloons. And so they can pressurize their body with that water that they're pulling in. So I don't know this. I don't know if they're not using some weird muscles as well, but I do know that they can sort of pump up that stomach, and that's one way that it'll pop out. Same thing for the anemones, actually. Oh. Our anemones here, not echinoderms, right? The anemones are cnidarians. Yeah. So they're related to like corals and jellyfish, or, well, we're going to get into like the fish thing here, I'm sure, no doubt, with our talking about sea stars. But the anemones also can like push their stomach out to throw up food. Whatever they haven't digested, they'll kind of like toss their stomach up and shake out the bits.
So we got another question here.
Okay.
So any idea why sea stars and sea cucumbers come in so many bright colors? Is it warning coloration, or does the color simply come from pigments in the food they eat, or something else?
Ooh.
I know about the warning with sea cucumbers.
Yeah, we can
they look very menacing, and even their little spines on top, they look like they're very, very, very sharp. So if some animal was going to be trying to eat them, like a predator of some sort, like sea otters will eat sea cucumbers, that red color makes them look like they're poisonous and like they're very, very, very scary.
They are not, however.
No, they are not.
No.
And the spines actually are very soft.
They're very, very
like whenever
squishy.
if you were at the touch pools and you were to gently touch the sea cucumber, you would notice that they're very squishy.
Yeah.
They feel like very jello-like.
Yeah, so it is, in that case, sort of a show, where it's like, oh,
it's like a warning,
I'm really spiky, I'm really brightly colored.
Yeah.
You don't know, maybe I'm going to hurt you, maybe I am poisonous. And it's not. But that could be one reason for the super bright colors. Also, one of the things we see a lot, like with the Vermilion Stars, for example, is sort of this bright red and bright orange. This actually won't show up underwater for the most part. And that's because red and orange are the first colors that get filtered out of the sunlight as you're going underwater. So these will actually appear like a dark gray. So it might blend in more with the surfaces that they're on rather than just being super bright. Another question?
Really good question. No, not yet, but I'm sure we have some. But I would like to talk a little bit about the madreporites.
Yes.
I know that we have a good video, I think, of a Velcro sea star, which again, that's also the fish-eating sea star.
So here is that structure you called it. What's the name of this?
Madrepore.
A madreporite.
Yeah.
And this relates to that open water circulatory system that we talked about. Or vascular system, and that's because what does this do? What does this contribute?
Yeah, so it contributes to their respiratory system, or how they breathe. So they don't breathe like we do. They don't have lungs, right? And even though Alex said skin gills, they're not really breathing in like a fish would.
No, it's just absorbing.
Which question for you?
Yeah.
Starfish versus sea star.
I knew I was going to get it as soon as I called them jellyfish. Taylor was like, who? Here at the SeaLife Center, we do try to be a little more correct, right? These are not fish. These are invertebrates. So the same thing goes for jellyfish, or as we call them here, sea jellies. So this is another madreporite here. And as you were kind of getting to, this draws water in.
Right,
Yeah.
yes.
But
Hydrovascular system.
The difference between sea stars and starfish, there's no difference. It's just a name. They're not fish. So we try to avoid that confusion of someone going, wait, these are fish? We're like, no, they're not. So we call them sea stars.
Yeah.
But you can kind of make out a little bit of the texture there. The madreporite actually is like a sieve. It's got, it's water permeable, but it filters, they don't want to just like pull in everything that's in the water. So it's got a really porous nature to it. And when they draw water in, it's kind of getting filtered. And our sea stars all have these. Some of them are easier to find than others. I think I end up really, yes, I do. This is another leather star with all those skin gills out and about. But you can actually see, I had to kind of look around. I was just kind of scanning for the madreporite. I did ultimately end up finding it, I think. Yeah, it's right there.
There it is.
There's our madreporite. Sweet. So
there's a good eye spot.
There's a good eye spot on the
Some
arm
feet.
there coming on over on it.
Look at that.
All right. So something we haven't really talked about are the urchins and how they eat. And we have talked about the stomachs on the the stomachs on the sea stars, the little mouth hands on the sea cucumbers. But urchins are entirely different once again.
They are so cool.
This is, did you shoot this one?
I did,
Yeah.
yes. Yep. So see their little tube feet before we get into their mouth, like
Yeah.
hanging onto the glass. They're on the side.
Yes, they're kind of holding
Yeah,
on.
they live in that rocky shore, so they have those like totally stuck to the side. But look at that. It's creepy.
They have teeth.
They have teeth. They have 5 teeth.
Yeah.
It's actually, their whole mouth structure is called Aristotle's lantern.
Yeah, it's a kind of a
Aristotle.
fancy name.
Yeah, very fancy, but that is essentially how they're eating. So they have 5 teeth, and they kind of make that star shape as it comes around again. You'll be able to notice that. But they use their tube feet as well, just like sea stars did, to kind of move their food towards their mouth. But then they will use their little teeth here and eat it that way.
Yeah, so like one of the things that urchins are well known for, they will eat our chopped squid. We'll put that in, and we've seen them like pull it up and eat that. They'll happily eat that, but they also love to eat kelp.
They
and
do.
So if we have some kelp that like breaks free in the aviary, for example, on a dive, we can bring that over and toss it in the touch tank for them, and they'll munch that up over a couple days. But famously, the fur trade kind of decimated sea otter populations. Sea otters love to eat urchins, and when the sea otters weren't around, the urchin population kind of exploded, and those areas faced really large declines in the coverage of kelp forests. And that's because not only do they love to eat kelp, they are super efficient at killing kelp. Even if they don't manage to eat the whole piece, those teeth just kind of like munch through the stalk or the stem. I'm really actually bad with my kelp
Your
parts.
kelp.
They have fancy names. I'm going to have to study up on that. But then the whole thing will just drift away, and it's dead now without that anchor at the bottom.
Yeah.
So we're kind of coming up. I think we're going to run a couple minutes late on this one.
I have a question, or a thought.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Spines
Spines.
on sea urchins.
What about them?
Poisonous, yes or no?
Not ours.
Not ours.
Not ours. So our sea urchins are not venomous. And I'm going to pull up a video of just showing you it's perfectly fine to touch our sea urchins here.
I did it.
While I'm doing that, I do want to encourage some maybe like last call for the questions. And we're going to just show a couple more critters here, a couple more of our echinoderms, and probably wrap up. But it's pretty eventful for
Yeah,
questions.
this has been great.
People show up, they see these animals, they look very strange. And half the time we get asked, is that alive?
Yeah.
Is that a living
Look at
animal?
all the people behind us at the
Yeah,
touch
at
pools
the
right
touch
now.
So
they're having fun.
we were going to look at the urchin and how we can touch it. So the spines on our red urchins, these are different from those green urchins. They look really scary, but they're only about as sharp as like a toothpick.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have known people that have stepped even on our red urchins here. There are more tropical urchins you don't even want to brush against. They will get you. But if you step on a red urchin or a green urchin here with bare feet, I mean, it's going to hurt.
Still
It's going to
gonna
get you
not
real
feel
bad.
good, for sure.
They are loosely barbed, so once they get into you, they can break off, and they'll kind of naturally work their way deeper in your skin. So you still don't want to get stabbed by one, but ours here, perfectly safe to touch.
There I go.
This little finger come down. And one of the things we tell people is we ask, hey, have you gotten a hug from a sea urchin today? Because when you touch in between those spines, they will sort of close up on your finger. And we're like, oh, they're hugging us. It's most likely a defensive behavior, right? Because you think about what are those spines
Like,
for?
please don't touch me.
Please don't touch. They're okay. They're just checking. They're like, ooh, is it a predator, right? Because just like when you touched on the sea star and like all the little claws came up and it reached back, they just want to make sure it's nothing scary. When you touch in between the spines on a sea urchin, it's like, uh-oh, those spines are supposed to like keep predators away, but now there's something touching in between them. Is that a predator that I need to know about? And so they'll squeeze on it and to try to like scare away stuff, but they're not going to hurt you. They don't like throw the spines at you.
They
or
can
anything
drop
like that.
them though. Like they will lose.
They can lose. I've seen them every once in a while. They'll lose one in there.
Yeah.
Do they grow them back?
Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
They do.
And that's a
Sea
triple
stars.
show. Yeah.
Yeah. Sea stars can also regenerate their arms as well if they fall off. Here's a good clip of a new arm growth.
So you can see just how different this arm on the right there is versus the other arms. It doesn't have the coloration. It's kind of like this little like embryonic arm. It's not like the same size or anything. So if they lose an arm, they can grow back, but it takes them a long time, like years to grow back. And honestly, the arm will probably never fully catch up with the other arms. It's always going to be just a little bit smaller. And it costs resources to do this. If they're getting by just fine with 4 arms instead of 5, or in the case of the sea stars, like 19 arms instead of the sunflower stars, 19 arms instead of 20 arms, then they may not even bother to grow those back. Oh, we've got a question of, do you have shrimp in the touch tank? I'm going to let Taylor move our camera about. Oh, you'll probably have to get it from this side now that I think about it. All right, here we go. Yes, we do have shrimp in our touch tanks here. These are spot prawns. And if you ever go to a restaurant and you order like Alaska jumbo shrimp, that tends to be these. These are what we have for the most part. All right, and it doesn't look like we have any other questions. I'm going to leave you with 2 more odd creatures we don't normally see here, but they're still echinoderms. And actually, maybe even 3, although we don't have one of them here. So I'm going to show you real quick our Brittle Stars. So these we don't usually see because they will tuck themselves down in between the rocks. Usually the only parts we see of them are their arms, but every once in a while you can luck out and you can see them kind of in between. So if you ever do visit us here at the center, try to keep an eye out for our Brittle Stars. Taylor wanted me to get a little time lapse of some of them in our microhabitat here.
Look how cool that is.
They do wave their arms around. They can actually actively grab things as they swim by with those arms. They catch them. I've seen them.
Look at the tide.
There's footage of them getting squid. Yeah, this tank has a simulated tide there, which they just get washed around. And the other one we have in our microhabitats we've talked about before are our Brittle Stars. So these are 2 more strange kind. Oh, excuse me. We just looked at the Brittle Stars.
Basket stars.
Our basket stars, yes. Which you can kind of see they get this odd curvature to them. And we did a time lapse of them as well. So you can see they kind of can curl and uncurl. It's all very like Nightmare Before Christmas a lot of times when they're sort of uncurling them. It makes me think of it. And there it goes. You can see that basket star expanding out those arms. And as I said, I was going to talk about one last echinoderm. I don't believe we have any here currently. But if you're ever walking the beach and you find a sand dollar, that's an echinoderm. Right, I'm going to hold this on up. It probably won't focus. If that looks familiar to you, if you ever found that on a beach, that's an echinoderm. This is the leftover skeleton of the echinoderm. And when they're alive, sand dollars kind of look like squashed sea urchins, like the little green urchins. They've got little spines on them, that sort of thing. There's another one called a sea biscuit, which is kind of like a squashed-looking urchin. But yeah, all sorts of cool echinoderms out there. I'm glad you were able to join us.
This is so fun.
We had a lot of questions, so that's been fun. These are just weird creatures, and we wanted to bring them to you in ways you don't normally see. If you visit the touch tank, they're just laying there. They're not really moving. You might not get a super close-up look at them, so we wanted to be sure we went through just what's so cool about them. And as always, we want to thank our sponsor, Royal Caribbean Group, for making it possible to bring you these up-close looks of things here at the touch tank. So if there's any questions we haven't gotten to, we'll try to answer those in the chat, or if you can leave a comment, we will hopefully get to that as well. We do keep an eye out for those. Or if you just wake up in the middle of the night and you want to know blank, you're like, oh, I should have asked them about anything else. What about the sea cucumbers? And maybe they drop their guts, I've heard.
They do.
Curious about that? You can email us at AskTuffy, which is ASKTUFFY at alaskasealife.org. But again, we want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you again for another virtual visit in the future. So long.